Hi guys, welcome to Counterpoints. My name's Connor. I'm a science fiction, politics, and philosophy nerd. I would argue a classical Republican, real Republican, meaning that I actually have Republican values, and the Republican Party has abandoned all of them, which is disappointing to me. However, I like breaking down online politics and online media. I have a debate between two acquaintances of mine, online friends, I would argue. Ryan Mullally, who is a center-right lawyer, and then I have NotSoErudite, who I would say is like center-left. She has some progressive instincts, but realistically, like, she steelmans Jordan Peterson all the time. And so this debate is probably the narcissism of small differences, where they're going to be fighting about principles and political efficacy. But I heard that it's actually kind of a tough conversation, so I want to break it down. Let's go.
Just to give the backdrop here, I think that we were going to talk about Stephen's approach to public discourse in following the events of Charlie Kirk's assassination, and why I took issue with that to a certain extent. I think you've taken issue with it too, but you've more or less defended it. And then also maybe talk a little bit about law, culture war, American politics, where we are, and
Sure.
Probably there's a segue between those.
Gotcha. Just for my audience to know, like, who are you? What do you believe in? Why should they care? And where do they find you?
Great. Thank you for that. So I'm Ryan Mullally. I'm a former Teach for America member, former New York City public school teacher, current attorney, and I've litigated at, I think at this point, every level of the U.S. court system, including the U.S. Supreme Court. So I've been around and done some cases, some of which you've probably heard of. I decided to start doing internet law, politics, philosophy, because I felt like maybe I had something to contribute. And if you know me, it's probably because I've debated Destiny and Peace Code several times, which is probably the highest click thing I've done. I have a channel called Natural Law with Ryan Mullally on YouTube, and you can follow me at X at Ryan C. Mullally, with my little tiny icons on screen if you can read them. But in terms of politics, I was a vibes-based Democrat my entire life. So I voted for Democrats. I don't think I skipped any elections. I think I voted straight Democrats my entire life up till 2020.
Acreal says, yeah, it's a totality of all these things, not each one individually. Connor, don't be dumb. Yeah, no shit. But how do people use it? People see 2 or 3 points and they're like, bam, you're a fascist, which is counterproductive to actually having a conversation. So while you guys in my chat are pretending that you have 3,000 IQ, which you do because you're in my chat, but while you're pretending the rest of the world has 3,000 IQ, they fucking don't. They don't. They misuse this shit all the time. I'm not misunderstanding shit. Connor misunderstanding that list again because he's too busy being angry. Please read the top of the paragraph. Sure, I'll read the top of the paragraph again. Society is only fascist when it has all 14 points. Brits, 14 characteristics of fascism. Political scientist Dr. Lawrence Britt recently wrote an article about fascism. Fascism, anyone? Free inquiry. Studying the fascist regimes of Hitler, Mussolini, and Franco, Spain, Suharto, Indonesia, and Pinochet, Chile. Dr. Britt found they all had 14 elements in common. He called these the identifying characteristics of fascism. The excerpt is in accordance with the magazine's policy. Yeah, this is dumb as fuck. Once again, it's dumb as fuck. Just read Gentile. Just read Gentile, and you won't have all the confusion. Why do many word when few word do same? Why use many word when few word do more? Use few word. Few word better. Few word better for definition. I right, you wrong.
2024, during Biden's administration, I registered as an independent. And then in 2024, I opted not to vote for either candidate as I didn't think either warranted my support. I would have voted right in 2024 if it had been anyone other but Trump. But with Trump, I couldn't quite do it. So I opted not to. In having discussions with people online, it's become very clear to me that I don't think my values or ideas have a place on the left. Maybe they used to. Maybe I moved. I certainly got more conservative in law school. So there's a question, chicken or egg question there. But I don't really see a place for me in the left anymore, which maybe is something that's worth talking about, how we got to that place one way or the other. So anyway, that's a long monologue, but hopefully interesting.
What do you politically believe in? Like, what are your political values?
So I'm an originalist. I'm a limited government enthusiast. So if we're going to talk about like political prescriptions, the most common thing that people will hear me say is, our system works just fine. The problem is we're using it wrong.
True.
We're not supposed to have so many things be national issues. We can't have a government for 350 million people where you cram down 51% to 49% across the country. The reason our system was set up as a federal system is to allow states to be very different and to make.
True. This is also true. I'm just going to read Big Hoff 98 super chat again because I parasocially love him for super chatting. 10 euro says fascism is frankly just used by libs as a name for their enemy in their Schmittian friend-enemy distinction narrative, which is actually textbook fascism, which is hilarious. I don't think it's textbook fascism because that's neither politically cooperative nor flexible authoritarian. Well, it could be argued to be an authoritarian step. So it could be an authoritarian move. However, I think that friend-enemy distinctions are also not necessarily fascist, right? Liberals had friend-enemy distinctions when it came to communists in the 20th century and fascists when in the early 20th century, right? Just because they had a Schmittian friend-enemy distinction doesn't mean that they, like liberals, all of a sudden became fascists. I think that's silly.
Very different decisions and to have people live very different lives there and to not make everything a national issue. And our federal system is not equipped to do what we're asking it to do. And because of that, everything is crazy all the time. And then you add social media to that, and you add the culture wars to that, and you have a perfect storm that's brewing, and that's where we are right now. That's our moment. So one or more of those three things have to change if we're going to find any equilibrium.
Gotcha. Okay. So like when you're looking at the midterms, are you going to vote? Are you going to opt to abstain? Like how are you thinking about the midterms right now?
See, okay, so the reason why this was called a struggle session by Ryan Mullally, in my opinion, was because he felt like Erudite wasn't really there to have a conversation with him. She was more trying to push him into voting Democrat or voting liberal, considering how bad the country is. However, I think if I'm taking a blind stab in the dark, what Ryan wants to do is say, hey, Democrats, you fucked up because you lost me as a voter despite voting for Democrats my entire life. And while I won't vote for Trump because of XYZ ABC, that doesn't mean that I'm going to pick a communist over a Republican every single time. So as a result, how about you consider how you lost me and reform the way that you are? That way, maybe we can break some political bread. But instead, Erudite's like, hey, and by the way, I haven't pre-watched this, but this is what I was told about this conversation. I was told that Erudite was much more interested in trying to bully Ryan into becoming a center-left liberal again, rather than trying to listen to how Democrats lost him in the first place. Abby Rhodes says, thank you for the new membership gift. I got the notification. Based. Patriarch says, Connors, EVs are fairly expensive. That marketing strategy won't work for people who can reasonably afford them. I agree, but that's where I think subsidies come in. And also, by the way, you guys are going to hate this take, but I actually love this take, okay? I think that carbon capture, this is why I wanted to talk to Gen X about carbon capture as a policy. So how much carbon dioxide, how much does it cost to capture a ton of CO2? Is $40 to $120 per ton of something, $15 to $25 per ton of concentrated industrial streams, to $40 to $120 per ton sources like power plants, and $600 per ton for direct air capture. Okay, so I did the math on this originally for carbon capture, and effectively what I did is I think I did the highest cost of how much it costs to capture CO2, and then I divided it up by how much CO2 is produced by a gallon of gasoline, and I think that it was $1. I think that when you divide up the amount of CO2 produced by gasoline for a single gallon, it's $1. And so what you would need to do, in my opinion, is because what we're doing is we're talking about externalities. For those of you who don't know, externalities are things that are not immediately obvious. As a matter of fact, let's look up the definition so I'm not bullshitting you with my definition. A side effect or consequence of an industrial or commercial activity that affects other parties without being reflected in the cost of the goods or services involved, such as pollination of surrounding crops by bees kept for honey. So CO2 production is an externality that is not currently calculated with gasoline. And so what I think we should do is we should calculate in that externality. Oil companies should be responsible for building CO2 capture plants that capture as much CO2 as they put out into the world through the gasoline that they have sold, and they should pass on that cost to the consumer. And so as a result, let's say that we're down to $2 a gallon or $3 a gallon. Then a $2 gallon of gas is going to cost $3, and a $3 gallon of gas is going to cost $4. But what you're not doing is you're not destroying the environment. And then simultaneous to capturing the externality of CO2 production, you also should subsidize electric, because electric doesn't have that externality. And so as a result, you can make electric cheaper, since it's technically better for the environment. So that's how I would do it. I understand that a lot of people don't like that, but that would be my policy prescription. I need to use the restroom. I'm going to get some water. There's roughly 150 people in my chat. Like the stream, share it with your friends, engage with chat, super chats if you got them, memberships if you got them. I parasocially love you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for hanging out.
I haven't made a decision yet. I'll see where things are. There are certainly things that could happen that would sway me one way or the other by now. The problem I'm having currently, and this is broadly kind of where I was in 2024, and I don't think it's that different now, is that I don't trust the left to have power again. And what I would like to, what would change that is some kind of articulation of where the left is. But I have a suspicion that there's been a divergence in moral foundations, like what the values are, what people care about, what they think about, what their fundamental axioms are. I think there's been a divergence, and I don't know how to bridge that gap, though I'm trying.
So as an originalist, I'm curious how you haven't decided to clearly vote against Trump in the midterms. Like, that seems surprising to me.
I don't even know how those would connect. What's the relationship between those two things in your mind?
I would say Trump has kind of, I think he's even openly basically stated that like the Constitution is like less important to him than like his visions and plans. Like, essentially, if the Constitution gets in the way of something he thinks that the country should do or wants to do, then essentially he would like overstep it, right? Yeah,
but originalism is a judicial philosophy that is enacted by members of courts. It's not a philosophy for presidents. It's a philosophy. It's a judicial interpretation. And he appointed Kavanaugh's not like a true blue originalist, but he appointed 2 very strong originalists and 1 originalist adjacent justice who have been tremendous. And in the last administration, they appointed Justice Jackson, who's been awful. And just like to be clear about like what it means to be an originalist, my concern with non-originalist justices is that they rewrite the Constitution from their own perspective. So when you say like, do you want to honor the Constitution? My concern is that if you keep appointing justices who will do whatever they want, they'll say, well, this is what I think is good, so the Constitution ought to say that. That's very dangerous for someone who's serious about the Constitution. So anyway, I'm not sure how originalism could possibly be if anything, it would pull the other direction. But Trump's not on the ballot, and the midterms barely affect judicial nominees. I guess it would if you got enough representation in the Senate, but it seems fairly unrelated to me.
Yeah, I guess to me, I would say like it feels like Trump is like pretty actively trying to destroy the American project and the Constitution, especially with like his senior admin, so JD Vance, somebody who could be running in the future, accusing the Republicans of basically saying that we've stacked the Supreme Court, but then also saying that they're politically and legislatively motivated against them, despite the fact that the court is actually stacked right-leaning than otherwise, right? So you have JD Vance looking at a court stacked in his favor and then saying that they're legislating from the bench when they just happen to disagree with Trump, right? We have this like massive violation of
which
like,
case are you referring to?
I'm not sure which case it was in that JD Vance said this. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the comment. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that Trump and Vance say that I don't like, and I have no doubt that you'll be able to show me any number of things that that they said that I don't like. And for the record, like Trump's insufficient, I don't want to say care or reverence.
TL1524 says, Connor, for the love of God, do not make EVs sexy. My grandfather showed me romantic mode in his Tesla, and I almost puked my guts out. Seats down, window tint, screen fireplace, berry white. Awesome.
For the rule of law is why I didn't vote for him. So, you know, like the false slave electors thing is just not something I could square. So, like
Sure.
to the extent that
So
there's a
it's that-
problem there, I would agree with you that there's a problem there. But the solution to that is not to appoint to get Democrats in power who are going to appoint justices who are then going to further undermine the Constitution. So that's why I didn't see the connection.
Yeah, I guess I could be wrong. Most originalists I know kind of view the founding fathers as like pretty based statescraftsmen. They drafted like the most powerful, good political document in history, which is why they're originalists. They essentially want the original writings, intentions, and meanings of the founding fathers within the Constitution to be like enacted. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but I don't think. I think that's like directionally correct. I don't think that's actually the moral issue that drives originalism, but I think it's a fair description of it. I think that the heart of originalism is concern for democracy. Like when you think about constitutional rights, people often look at them as a positive only, and they are positive, but people think of them like, oh my goodness, I have this right, isn't that so wonderful? But what a right actually means is it's something that's removed from the scope of democracy. You cannot pass a law that abridges freedom of speech. You cannot pass a law that abridges the right to bear arms. Like it is removed from the democratic process. And that could be a good thing. There's good reason.
Okay. Lethal Lance says, I can see a world where socialists are political corporatists and flexible authoritarianisms, yet I feel like calling them fascist would be missing something. There's something else that makes a fascist. I don't agree at all. I actually genuinely do not agree at all. I think there's something else that makes a socialist. One of the interesting conversations between Keith Woods and Cultured Thug was they were saying that China had realized fascist ideals through their current state capitalist model better than any other fascist society in history. And so I think that socialists and communists can kind of accidentally become political corporatists and flexible authoritarians, but necessarily the flexible authoritarianism would not be part of a socialist ideal. It would almost be like a mistake of history and material circumstance, not an intentional act.
To remove things from the democratic process. But what originalism says is you ought not do that unless the people said you should. If the people said we're removing this from the democratic process through their elected representatives, that's fine. What you shouldn't have is judges adding to that list on their own. Because if they do that, they're stealing from democracy. They're stealing the right to decide from the people. So originalism is in that sense, their reverence for the founding fathers is part of it, but I would say a bigger part of the motivation is a concern about judges becoming the supreme branch that controls the entire process, which is a concern I've heard people level about Canada, for example, that there's issues where the human rights tribunals are kind of like doing what they do and there doesn't seem to be a check on it. I'm not versed in Canadian politics, but that's one of the things people.
What is killing me about all automobiles today is a design. I don't want to drive around in a Dublo black kid car. I don't know what that means, but what I'll tell you is, Nissan Altima. Okay. I don't like the Nissan Altima. I think it's boring. I know that people who drive Nissan Altimas love Nissan Altimas, but they're boring. Right? They're boring sedans, smooth shapes, kind of looks like an egg, that's boring to me. Weirdly enough, while I'm hating on the Nissan Altima, 2006 Mazda 3, dude, I had a Mazda 3 Sports Edition with a manual. This car was awesome. I had this car in copper orange. And I was way too big for the car, but I've never had so much fun driving. Like zoom, zoom, indeed. This car was freaking awesome. 2006 Mazda 3, copper orange. Oh my God, my baby. I still miss it. I miss this car almost as much as I miss my dog. I loved this car with my whole heart. This car was beautiful. Anyways, I know it looks corny to you, but every man remembers his first love. But look, 1960s muscle car. Okay. All you need to do is build a updated version of the GTO, put the battery pack in the bottom, use modern materials so it's light as hell, and have it do 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. Do this Mustang. Actually, so the problem with the Mach EV, okay, Mustang Mach E, the problem with this is it looks like a crossover, okay? This looks like a family car. This can do 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, which is awesome. But it effectively has a crossover rear, which kind of shows that it's a family car. Imagine the exact same battery pack, but instead of it looking like a family car, it looks like this. You would sell 1 billion units. Every person under the age of 20 or under the age of like 30 would want to buy a 0 to 60 3-second car with this aesthetic. I don't know what's so hard about making sexy cars. I don't know why making sexy cars is such a problem. Literally just look at the sexy cars of the past like 50 years. The new Corvette, by the way, which I think they lost something in the aesthetic. They should have called this something else. This shouldn't have been a Corvette. This should have been some other Chevy entry. They should have come up with a new line for the new Chevy. But the new Corvette is basically a fake Ferrari. But this aesthetic kicks ass. Old Corvette. If you made a Stingray with an electric battery, these things would sell. Same thing with the Thunderbird. This isn't a Thunderbird. This is an old Corvette. But the old Thunderbird, same thing with the Prowler, dude. The Prowler, I'll admit, is a cringe car. Okay? I'll admit it's a cringe car. However, what they nailed with the Prowler, even if this is a cringe car, is that it has that like 1910s, 1920s rich person car aesthetic. Rich person car. Where like the engine compartment is long as shit. Dude. This thing, oh my God, just build this thing with less weird lights. Make it electric, make it go 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. Anyway, sorry. All I'm doing is I'm sharing my car aesthetic preferences, but listen, the car industry doesn't know what it's doing and it's pissing me off.
Bring up with me from time to time.
Yeah. So I guess when we're talking about the originalists, I understand what you're saying. It feels like the reason why we care, why an originalist cares about this thing is because they think like the Constitution is something good and worth preserving, right? That it was built really well. And therefore things and individuals, including Supreme Court justices that get appointed, as you would say, but I would also suggest politicians, particularly the president and the executive branch, doing things to infringe that are anti that Constitution.
Abbey Road says, are you conservative, Connor? Yeah, some of the time. Let me show you. Pictures. Where's the 5 rings to rule them all? Really? Why can't I find it? It's in here somewhere. Where's my real Republican chart? What the fuck? Sorry for using a potty word, but it's in here somewhere. Nope. Did I delete it on accident? Oh, here we go. Okay. So, Abbey Road, to answer your question. Burkean conservatism means defaulting to existing institutions, but then needling good, progressive, and liberal criticism and incorporating it into the world. That's what Edmund Burke, the philosophical founder of conservatism, believed. I am an environmental conservative where I think that we are stewards of the planet, and so we must care about the planet and take care of it. I am a neoconservative in that I think that the United States should use soft power and hard power to advocate for free societies across the planet. I'm a social conservative, not as bad. Like I like the gays just fine. I have plenty of trans friends, but I think that in general, people should try to follow as much virtue as possible. They shouldn't be sexual degenerates, and that they should engage in creating families, and that sexual morality is good for society to some degree. And then I'm a fiscal conservative in that, not that I want to cut everything and cut taxes, but I do want to stabilize the fiscal position of the United States so we don't collapse the republic through reckless spending and debt. So in these degrees, I am a conservative in each one of these definitions, which sucks because the Republican Party doesn't believe in any of that shit anymore.
Feels like something an originalist would also be very opposed to.
Absolutely. And I think that I am very, very willing to call out abuses of the Constitution. And when I think Trump has made a misstep, like
Varun Bhaskar says, here's some support for reforming the Republican Party, which I think should be named the Bull Moose Party. Also need the Discord link. Varun, I will link it for you momentarily. Thank you for your $5 super chat.
I'm delighted to do that. But you have to be honest when you do it. Like, I love the FIRE. They're a wonderful free speech organization, and they've made the very powerful case that the Trump administration is awful on free speech, truly awful. And I agree with them. The second worst administration on free speech in my lifetime was the Biden administration.
Here is the Discord link. You should have it in chat.
So, you know, like,
is it close? Like, not only are they awful.
Yes.
Well, hold on. Not only are they bad on free speech, but they also are trying to violate things like due process. And when the Supreme Court weighs in favor of due
Bingro became a member. Thank you, King. I parasocially love you.
process, I just was looking it up while we were talking. JD Vance was fighting with the Supreme Court over the violation of due process with Abrego Garcia, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was trying to get around the spirit of what the Supreme Court was doing, and he was railing against them, basically saying the Supreme Court was basically excessively checking the executive branch. But it feels like any originalist would say, sorry, due process, free speech, these things kind of matter.
Yeah, of course they matter. But I think that one thing that I get this from Pisco a lot. One thing that
does Republican equal conservative? No, not necessarily.
I guess I don't want to say judicial supremacist. That just seems too loaded. But one thing the left doesn't seem comfortable with, generally speaking, is the idea that the checks in our democracy involve.
AF Racing says, I sent you a DM on Discord, actual facts for after the stream, you stubborn son of a bitch. Heart face. All right. Sorry for pissing you off. You guys pissed me off too. I parasocially love you though. Thank you for the super chat.
All separation of powers. There are things that can be done by the president, by the legislature, that the court doesn't have a say in. They don't have a role in it. Now with Garcia, they did have a role in it. They ordered the facilitation of his return, but they struck down. The original district court said the order was you have to expedite and facilitate his return. Why did the Supreme Court strike down the word expedite? Because the Supreme Court does not have the authority to order the executive branch to enter into negotiations with a foreign power. They just don't. They can't do it. So they can say there was a violation. They can say you should remedy this by facilitating it, but they're also aware that there are limits to their power, and they're not going to overstep that just because.
Abbey Road says, can you be a progressive Republican? Arguably, yes. Abbey Road, one of the actually named progressive Republicans is one of my heroes, Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt is a little racist. You know, he talks about like skull shape and shit and how like certain people are specifically, you know, racially sensitive to different kinds of governance and this kind of crap. Like he was like a race realist in the early 20th century, but it was a different time. A lot of people were racist or race realists in the early 20th century. But Teddy Roosevelt did stuff like he broke up monopolies and he flexed American power in the Caribbean and he built the Panama Canal and he had like a really strong civic nationalist sense of patriotism where like, yeah, he was a little bit racist, but like he still wanted Black Americans and Native Americans and any citizen of the United States to think of themselves as an American first. And so Teddy, he was also an environmental conservationist. He actually established the federal national park system. And so while he was like a big game hunter, like he did hunt and kill many animals, he was also somebody who believed in like a homeostasis, a balanced relationship with nature. And so he's one of the people who established the national park system. That way we didn't like plunder our natural resources and our natural heritage. So yeah, like Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive Republican. And if there's any person in American history who I identify with most, it's probably Teddy Roosevelt. I think he's one of the most based people to ever exist in American politics.
Because they found a violation, which is the sort of thing that Justice Jackson takes issue with. And yes, do I love Vance's comments? No. Is that worth Putting another 2 or 3 Justice Jacksons on the bench, also no.
Yeah, I don't know. It just Josiah sent me something. It feels like you're being
my buddy Josiah.
Yeah. It feels like what you're outlining right now is being like, well, Biden was really bad on free speech. Okay. But also Trump is really bad on free speech. 1 second. Just a donation.
Seems like we're going to go into struggle session mode. So I'm going to have to push a little.
Gotcha. Okay. So maybe something we can just, why don't we just actually watch this timestamp together? I think that would be better because I'll be seeing it for the first time and you'll be seeing it for the first time. But essentially what Josiah is arguing, that's probably important to mention here, is that the FIRE organization isn't just saying that he's violating free speech, but he's violating free speech in an unprecedented way. And this was only 3 months into the current establishment.
AF Racing says, I don't care about him disagreeing with it, but I do care about him disagreeing with it based off of misreading, then mischaracterizing it, what it says, whole chat of 150 people plus. Okay. I'm going to say this one more time, and I hope you can hear me when I say it. Whether we're talking about the 14 points from Umberto Eco or the 14 points from Britt, my problem with both descriptions is that they are historical analyses of a political ideology. And so what Umberto Eco has said, I think is overly vague. In reference to Britt, he said, I think I just keep calling them she because Britt sounds like a girl name to me. But what Britt said is that these 14 points were common in 4 different fascist societies in America, or not in America, in the world. 4 different fascist societies in the world held these ideas in common. And the reason why I think that's insufficient to properly define fascism is because that's like describing a disease through symptoms rather than describing a disease through actual description of its viral capacity. And so like a virus, as I understand a virus to be a pseudo life, like there's debate about whether or not viruses are alive. It's a code that infects living tissue and then it spreads disease in humans and also other living creatures. That's my lay understanding of viruses. And you can use a name and you can describe a virus using its like scientific name. Another way that you can describe a virus is through its symptoms. So this would be like Ebola and shitting yourself to death, okay? Ebola causes you to shit yourself to death. But the description of Ebola is Ebola because Ebola is a specific viral strain. So when you say Ebola is when you shit yourself to death, well, you're wrong because there's 10 other ways to shit yourself to death. I should know. I was in the hospital a month ago and I almost pooped myself to death. Okay. So there's food poisoning. There's viral infection, there's bacterial infection, there's blood pressure colitis, like ischemic colitis. There's like a dozen ways for you to poop yourself to death. So when you say, Connor, you don't understand, I am accurately describing the symptoms of fascism in 4 scientific cases in a metaphorical sense, if we were continuing with the viral analogy. I'm saying, I don't care that you're accurately describing symptoms. That's not the definition of the disease because these symptoms appear in so many other contexts that it's borderline useless for identifying the disease accurately. I think I have properly described the dynamic and the issue in our communication. Okay? I don't want to talk about the symptoms. I want to talk about the disease. Thank you. Please and thank you.
Right. This is long ago. And I would say you and I would probably agree. The first three months of Trump's presidency was bad and he did lots of bad shit. And since then, he has gone on to do really bad stuff excessively over and over. In fact,
So
even more.
The problem with this, and forgive me, but because I've done, I think 2 hours of struggle sessions with Josiah, 2 hours with Wade, probably 10 with Pisco at this point. So I'm familiar with the territory, if you don't mind. The problem isn't that Trump has done bad things. I will candidly admit he's done bad things. I didn't vote for him because I thought he might do bad things. The problem is that there is a directional disconnect where the choice to me looked like you can have Trump, who is pointing in the right direction on many things, but will fuck it up and will do corrupt things and will do things you disagree with along the way. And I decided I couldn't support that for the reasons I gave earlier. On the other hand,
yeah. So for instance, sorry, I'm going to steel man Ryan here. Securing the border is good. That's good. Deporting criminals, people who have actually committed crimes within the United States and or incarcerating them in aggressive law enforcement operations is good. Making sure that we have fair trade with international partners is good. Making sure that our military is strong and focused on war fighting is good. I'm trying to think of what else Trump has done. Those things are the things that I agree with. So those are the things that are popping into my brain. All those things are good. The way Trump does it is in the dumbest, least productive, most violative, most anti-constitutional way possible. Okay? I would like to reduce the homicides in the city of Chicago. I do not think that deploying the military to Chicago is anywhere near appropriate. And therefore, I made a lesser of two evils calculation that Kamala was going to be substantively less bad than Trump. And therefore, I was willing to pull the trigger on voting for Kamala, whereas Ryan wasn't willing to do that. But that being said, if Kamala did everything she wanted to do, let's say that she did the tax on unrealized capital gains. Let's say that she promoted a deaf, blind, gay, wheelchair-bound woman to the head of the Department of Defense. Let's say that she just like blanket extra constitutionally forgave student loans without going through the process. Let's say through judicial fiat, she opened up the border and said effectively everybody in Central and South America can come into the United States. Now, I don't think she would do 80% of that shit. However, her line of argumentation points in that direction. And so I'm with Ryan in that, listen, guys, I hate to break it to you. I'm a liberal in that I want maximal human freedom. But you and I do not agree on what maximal ordered human freedom is. We don't. Whenever we talk about like sex shit, you guys are like, yeah, bro, if you have like 1,000 dicks in 24 hours, that's totally normal. Well, you don't say totally normal. You say like, that's totally morally neutral. To me, that's not a morally neutral stance. That is a morally bad stance. And I think at minimum, there should be cultural pressure in order to stop this antisocial fucked up behavior. And at maximum, there should be some level of government intervention. And so while we can break bread on the Constitution of the United States is based, a liberal republic, meaning maximal freedom for citizens is based, we can agree that freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, right to due process, right to self-defense, we can agree that all these things are based. We're still going to fight on the details. And principally, I am different than you to some degree, at least to the liberals.
You will have people who will scrupulously or comparatively scrupulously follow the letter of the law while doing things that you think are un-American and contrary to the American proposition. And that's what I meant when I said I feel like there's a moral drift. Like, if you're talking about like what is a common American foundation? Like, what do you think the American founding principles are? Like, what is America to you? I know you're Canadian, so that's not fair, but
yeah, some level of like free. There's a lot of freedom. There's a lot of like freedom from like governmental overreach. I think that's why you guys value like the state model that you guys have, right? And I think that that's a pretty essential piece. I mean, I think we could like kind of point at like all of the fundamental building blocks of a nation built by the people for the people, very protective, particularly against tyrannical forces from like the upper.
Jay Barty says, why then would all industry not have its own liability? The gas station should capture the CO2 from their sale. No. Well, I think all businesses should capture externalities. And I think that's part of the reason why government is necessary. Because as an example, I could probably produce super cheap shit if I'm allowed to pollute, right? In the 70s and 80s, there was all sorts of horrible examples of like massive industrial companies just taking their toxic waste and throwing it into the water supply and giving people cancer and giving people like horrific diseases. No, number one, those people should have been prohibited from doing that in the first place. But number two, after it was discovered that they had poisoned entire communities through dumping toxic sewage into water, that is part of their external calculus. Just because they were able to do it due to lax environmental regulation or lax environmental enforcement doesn't mean that they're not responsible for the externalities of their outputs. So you're asking this like, well, why isn't everybody responsible for their externalities? Everybody is responsible for their externalities, like morally and should be legally.
Elites. I think that this is like essential to the heart of the American project in many ways, right? And giving everyone that freedom of ability to achieve what they can achieve, regardless of station status or race or gender. I think that these are all deeply fundamentally American things. My issue.
Hold on. But did she just misidentify the founding fathers versus like the American ideals in the modern context? Hold on.
Regardless of station status or race, that freedom of appeal to the heart.
That's not true.
Tyrannical forces from like the upper or the people, very protective, particularly against tyrannical forces from like the upper elites. I think that this is like essential to the heart of the American project in many ways, right? And giving everyone that freedom of ability to achieve what they can achieve, regardless of station status or race or gender.
Okay, that's true now, because the founders wrote beautiful words about how station and how like subject of birth should not limit you in your capacities as an American. But that was not true at the founding. There were plenty of founding fathers, plenty of people in the early 19th century, late 18th century, who believed that race and gender absolutely limited what kind of freedoms you were entitled to, 100%. So this is kind of more like an idealized modern interpretation of what the founding fathers talked about. However, I just want to point out that historically, the founding fathers definitely were infinitely more racist and sexist than the current American project.
I think that these are all deeply fundamentally American things. My issue, so there's this fallacy as somebody who's much more moderate, right? I'm much more center left. I'm sure Josiah and all my buddies, I roll at me all the time for my moderate positions. But as somebody who's also notorious for criticizing my own group, one of the frustrations.
Hauser Che says, what's the worst thing that the left has done? Been annoying on the internet so far. And then also like social media censorship, but we could get into the nitty gritty on that, and I don't really want to. Realistically, what the left is mostly guilty of is being fucking annoying as shit on the internet and being lax on border controls. Those are the two worst crimes of the left, in my opinion. As far as like executed policy, if you're talking about rhetoric or expressed desires for policy, we could get into that. But as far as like real world shit, being lax on the border and being cringe on the internet.
That I think is very valid of moderates, and I think is a thinking fallacy of moderates. And I think you're doing it now, essentially is why I'm bringing it up, is we'll look at two things and we'll go, okay, Trump is violating free speech. He's definitely stepping on it. And Biden was violating free speech, such as like pressuring Google to take out conservative things. I'm sure that's kind of what you're pointing to, for example, with Biden and free speech, correct?
I am, but you also, there's a lot of color on those things. Like during 2020, 2021, I thought about speaking publicly on the internet. It was something I was interested in doing, and I didn't, because at that time, culturally, I felt like it was too big a risk. Like, I'm a practicing attorney, I have a good job, I have a family. Like, there's the risk.
And Biden's policies personally affected you.
Not only that, they personally affected me, and that risk doesn't feel the same now. Like, it feels better. So, like there actually is a tangible
like
difference.
A moderate right, like white guy. But for example, me being a left-leaning E2 visa holder, as much as so many people get so mad at me for not criticizing Trump enough, I can't. It is not wise with the state of free speech in America, with the way that Trump handled, for example, the pro-Palestinian people, who, by the way, I don't even side with. I don't like most pre-Palestinian protests and rallies and whatnot, and they should have the right to free speech. The way that he infringed on their free speech is something that I have to be, as an immigrant, extremely concerned about, right? And so I guess to get back to the fallacy, because I don't want to run away from it, I think what often happens,
just a flag, it's an open question. I tend to agree with you that non-citizens have free speech rights. I think that's the correct position. If I were on the court, the answer I would give is that your free speech rights are on a spectrum that increases with your nexus to America. Like clearly, if you're applying for your visa and you're still in Canada, your rights are less than once you're here. And if you have never set foot in America or thought about America and you're just living in Canada, your free speech rights are kind of not our problem. So that's how I would do it. But just to be flagged, that has not been decided by the courts yet, to my knowledge. There's some 1950s case law, but it is unclear what level of speech rights illegals have versus legal residents versus long-term permanent residents like green card holders who in theory should have more, but we don't know the answer yet.
Sure. So to back up to what I'm trying to talk about, there's this fallacy where we go, okay, I saw it all the time. Russia is valid in being concerned about NATO expansionism. But Ukraine also has a value right claim to sovereignty. And a lot of moderates, the thinking fallacy will go, well, both sides have an argument here. So both sides are kind of right. The issue is Ukraine's right to sovereignty is like 95% value in a hierarchy of values. Their sovereignty matters way fucking more than Russia's concern to NATO sovereignty, NATO expansionism. You don't get to invade a country because you're worried about potential like allyships that they're going to broker, right? So you might be.
See, this is where I think I kind of get away from principle into realpolitik, okay? And I'm not even sure if I'm using realpolitik correctly. I should probably go ahead and Google realpolitik. So there's this phrase that I bring up all the time. Excuse me, which is it's a Greek parable about some Athenian Spartan war. And it's the powerful do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. And it's in reference to Athens sacking some random city that was neutral during a war. And so we can have all these principles in the Americas. We can have all these principles in Western Europe. We can have all these principles about what a country can and can't do. But what actually matters is what countries actually can and can't do. And so, you know, while we should constantly push for our principles to be enforced within reality, realpolitik is a pragmatic approach to politics that prioritizes practical and material factors such as natural interest and power over moral, ethical, and ideological concerns. The term comes from the German words real, realistic, and politik, politics. So this is where I think from a realpolitik analysis, Russia can be 100% concerned that it's losing its grip on Eastern Europe, and it can be in a desperate attempt to maintain some level of Eastern European influence. It can invade Ukraine, and that's a realpolitik calculation. I think that you can couple your moral objection with a realpolitik answer, though. And I think that the realpolitik answer is Europe and the United States will not put boots on the ground, but we will give munitions and financial aid to Ukraine as long as Ukraine is willing to fight. So that's where, for me, like we need to differentiate principle from realpolitik.
Be like, well, Russia probably is a little bit worried about NATO's whatnot. Moderate goes, see, both sides are arguing something, so both sides have a point. And so what I'm pointing out with the fire stuff and the Garcia and the violation of the ruling, yeah, there's this technical thing where the court couldn't force them to bring them back because that would be forcing the executive branch to do something.
Zena says, it seems incoherent to care about originalist judges, but not care about an executive that doesn't respect the Constitution. That's your point. I mean, I agree with you, but I think Ryan would probably concede that. I don't know if you... I think he would say that he can care about two things simultaneously.
But essentially, your originalist stacked Supreme Court said, hey, you violated this man's due process. You did. And you should facilitate the process by which he comes back. But we can't force you. And Trump said, great, fuck you. Don't give a fuck, right? There was no even ounce of honoring the spirit of the Supreme Court, speaking of checks and balances, whatsoever, from a stacked court that is in your favor, right? Trump has no regard for the Constitution in any way.
Brad Dar says no fossil fuel companies would ever go for that. They'll fight that with tooth and nail with massive amounts of lobbying and climate change denialism, as they've already been doing. Okay, well, if they're going to fight it anyways, then why not just do it anyways? Why would I give a fuck? Listen, oil companies are some of the most like powerful, profitable industries in the planet. Why do I give a fuck? You know, it's the same thing with like the fluorocarbons. the fluorocarbons, the people who were like ripping apart the ozone layer, and then we like regulated that they could only manufacture certain kinds of fluorocarbons that weren't detrimental to the ozone layer, and then the ozone layer was like infinitely better after a while. Like that's, you know, who cares? You know, we have to live on this planet. If we're going to live on this planet, then we should be responsible with the way with which we live on this planet.
Shape or form. And if we look at the fire stuff, they themselves say that Trump is unprecedented in his oversteps of free speech in a way that just Biden's administration, which I agree that there were missteps in the Biden administration, that it's not even comparable. All we're doing is being like, well, I have one example, Biden, so it's the same as Trump. And it's like,
no. I don't even think that's true. We can understand MAGA. We don't have to believe what MAGA believes, but we can understand. Okay? I understand MAGA, or at least I think I understand MAGA. MAGA's narrative, I'm going to stare into your eyeballs. Gen X, look away from the computer, okay? MAGA's narrative is that the federal government has been out of control for a century. That America used to be an isolationist nation that did not deal with all the bullshit of the world. Excuse me. But after World War II, using the horror of World War II as a pretext, without voting, without the input of the American people, the United States government unilaterally decided that we would become the world policeman and that our sons and daughters would die overseas in order to secure oil and international trade, and to secure Western Europe, and to secure South Korea, and to secure Vietnam, and to secure the free world, so to speak. But we never voted on that. The American people never made a choice in reference to that. The United States government just started paying $1 trillion a year to secure international trade. And because this burden of security disproportionately falls on conservative Americans, it's been conservative Americans who have been fighting and dying in internationalist, interventionist wars for the past century. And so as a result, they're sick of it. They don't want to be a part of Europe. They don't want to be responsible for Europe. They don't want to be a part of Africa. They don't want to be they don't want to be responsible for Africa. They don't want to be responsible for Central and South America. And frankly, they see the intervention of the United States as having blowback on America, like 9/11. The reason why 9/11 2001 happened is because we're involved in the Middle East and North Africa. And so as a result, Trump has come along and he said, not only did these motherfuckers send your kids, your sons and daughters to go fight and die in foreign wars, not only did they bankrupt the nation through foreign intervention and overseas international aid, which isn't true, but that's okay. That's part of the propaganda. Not only did these people spend all your money, tax you through the fucking nose, and send your kids off to die in foreign wars, we don't need to do any of this shit. We don't need to protect Europe. Europe can protect itself. We don't need to be helping Africans out. Africa can take care of itself. We don't need to be focused on Asia. We can compete with China, but we don't need any of this militarist bullshit. So we'll have a strong military in case anybody attacks the United States, but we don't need to have a strong military overseas because fuck the rest of the world. That's Trump's position, and that's popular with people who don't know shit about geopolitics or world history. That's popular with people who don't understand international supply chains. That's popular with people whose jobs were gutted and they've seen their towns die as a result of industry being shipped overseas. So just because they're wrong doesn't mean that they don't have a popular narrative. And just because they're doing bad shit doesn't mean that they think they're doing bad shit. So you have to understand their narrative. You have to acknowledge their narrative, or else you're not going to get fucking anywhere. And I think this is the frustration with people like Ryan Mullally and who share that with Erudite, is like, you say, sorry, I'll stay full screen for another second. You say, oh, well, they're wrong and they're bad and they're evil. And it's like, okay, yeah, I agree. They're wrong and they're probably bad and some of them are evil. But if you don't address what the right wing gives a shit about, then you're going to keep getting your shit kicked in. And that's what it feels like with left wingers, is they're like, well, we're correct, so we should just win. Well, you can't just be correct. You also have to be able to market your message in such a way that people give a fuck and take you seriously. We ultimately are a democracy. And what's so funny about this, too, this is one of the biggest ironies of the entire situation. One of the biggest ironies of the entire situation is that I'm a Republican. I believe in representative democracy. I think the average person is a fucking idiot. And I think that representatives should effectively say, hey, average Joe, you don't know dick about fuck. Vote for me and I'll make things good. Let me handle the details because you're a fucking country bumpkin. I actually believe in that, right? Like, I actually believe that our representatives should be the best amongst us who are capable of analyzing and implementing policy. But what's funny about Democrats is that they used to appeal to the working man, the nincompoop, the bum. They used to appeal to the people who had dirt and mud and oil covering their hands and their arms. And they used to say, hey, vote for us. We'll make your life better. But now it's the liberals who are saying, hey, average Joe, average working class person, you're a fucking schmuck. You don't understand shit about fuck. And as a result, shut up and vote for us. That's not a winning message. Okay? As much as I like being an elitist prick, it's not a winning message. Trump has the winning message. I hate to say it. I drive an Altima. Fuck you. Nice. James VR Gimp, I'm assuming that's your name, Campbell says, to me, we could tackle climate change with synthetic hydrocarbons adding to E85, so that's at least 20% of all the gas is part of a carbon cycle. Based. Yep. Sorry, I'm with Erudite descriptively here. I might be trying to steelman Ryan Mullally and, basically say that if you don't understand the right, then you're going to fuck up. But I agree with Erudite. Like, I don't think we should, just because we're trying to understand where the right wing is, doesn't mean that we have to concede to their fucked up reality. This is the Cadillac 16 concept vehicle, and it captures that like 1910s 1920s long engine bay concept that I love. Dude, I am intellectually turgid. They need to make the cab space better, but besides that, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. Oh my God. Have they not been on the screen for 10 minutes? Jesus Christ, dude. I'm such a fucking boomer. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm such a fucking douche. I'm such a douche. I fucking hate myself. Anyways.
Sorry, there's a super chat going on in the air. Okay.
All good.
I'm going to ask you a
Get the bag.
I hate myself.
Okay. Would Bukele release Abrego Garcia from a single phone call from Trump? If Trump had just...
All right, I'm going to fast forward like 20 minutes because I don't give a fuck about Kilmar Abrego Garcia. It's not that like on principle I don't agree. Like Kilmar Abrego Garcia, violation of a court order. Thank you to the 150 people who stuck with me despite me being a fucking boomer and playing the video without actually bringing it on screen. I'm a fucking idiot and I apologize. Reward my incompetence though. Like the stream, share it with your friends, engage with chat, super chats if you got them.
No, but if you're talking about the spirit of what the Supreme Court said, yeah, he could have said, oh, it looks like this is not a thing I should do by executive fiat. He didn't. I think that presidents take aggressive positions on legal issues from time to time. This is not unusual in our history. Like, do you...
Okay, what I heard from Ryan Mullally, and correct me if I'm wrong, I was around during the Obamacare days. And the Obamacare days, if I remember correctly, what was going on was Obamacare was passed as a hybridized law that wasn't what the left wanted, but it was definitely not wanted by the right. And what it did is it eliminated what is it, like pre-existing conditions. So insurance companies could no longer deny you just for having pre-existing conditions, which is obviously going to increase the cost of medical insurance. Then not just that, but sorry, I'm doing something simultaneously. Not only did it do that, but also it made it so everybody had to have health insurance. And there was an argument at the time that how do you compel, as the federal government, how do you compel people to consume a private service? Like, that's kind of crazy, right? That's kind of a bananas way to operate things, is how does the government compel people to consume a product? And what ended up happening was, I think there was some argumentation that, well, people drive cars and we compel them to buy insurance in order to drive cars. Therefore, while it is technically like a federal overreach of some kind of compulsion, you cannot compel somebody to get health insurance, but you can hit them with like a tax if they choose not to have health insurance or some shit. I genuinely forget the rationale. But that was the establishment of the thing. And I think what ended up happening was Obama said, you have to have health insurance. And he did do that via executive order that went to the Supreme Court. And then that got struck down. And so I think that's what Ryan Mullally was talking about, where he was getting turned off by the Democrats, effectively they could be doing something in the name of the greater good, but they were doing something extra constitutional that makes no gosh darn sense in reference to the United States of America and the way that it was formulated as a free country for free people. And so I think that's what he just said was the thing that like kind of turned him off to the Democrats, which makes sense, I guess.
And this is like this might be a weird backstory point, but do you,
from a principle perspective, probably not a pragmatic one.
Everyone complains about American healthcare and the American healthcare system. Do you know why it exists? Because
Western Hegemony says he's in the waiting room if I want to argue about fascism. No, not really. Sorry. I have a one-on-one in 15 minutes.
The American healthcare system?
Our insurance system? Because FDR bullied the shit out of the US Supreme Court by threatening to pack the court until they submitted to him and passed a series of decisions that, amongst other things, allowed him to cap wages in the United States. And with capped wages, employers could not attract new talent. So what they ended up doing was they offered health insurance. The IRS ruled that it was tax deductible, and that's why we have a primarily employer-focused health insurance system in our country. The reason why? Because FDR took an unbelievably aggressive approach to the Supreme Court, where he said, literally, if you don't just start passing my cases, I'm going to pack the court to 15 and destroy the current setup in the court. So, the idea that what Trump did in this situation is somehow beyond the pale in terms of presidential responses to a court order is, I find it ahistoric, and I just don't think the concern.
That's not what I've said.
Yeah, but was that good?
okay, I don't know why you were not understanding my position. I'll say it again. It is surprising to me as an originalist that in the upcoming midterms, you can say all you want about Biden. Sure. What we're dealing with right now is Trump, who on due process alone definitely didn't want to honor, just violated the guys' rights, and then wouldn't honor the Supreme Court without pressure. And on top of that, FIRE, the organization, says that there is this year alone, like a 67 times rate of the past 25 years of pressure on free speech. So if we're talking about free speech, you said it's about the same. Doesn't seem like FIRE thinks so. Seems like FIRE thinks it's way fucking worse than it ever was. And so what I'm saying to you isn't that Trump is uniquely horrible than all the 350 years, because there's been actually a lot of really fucked up presidents that have done.
Right. No, you guys, I got to the pooping definition. Bear in mind, guys, if you're not used to the way that I interact with chat, I actually scroll through chat chronologically. Although you guys gave me so much money last month that I have to buy a Bob Ross wig and I have to buy 2 monitors so I can have old chat and I can have current chat. So I think my chat responses will get better over time. But Trump isn't actually doing these things. They are a front for his power grab. I agree with you. That's why I think Trump's a piece of shit. That's why I voted for Kamala. I agree with you, Kyler. Do not mistake me wanting a strong border and wanting like foreign nations to be responsible for their own security. Do not mistake that for an endorsement of the Donald Trump or the MAGA movement. Just because they might have 2 or 3 policies that I agree with and they're very vague does not mean that I think that Trump isn't like the most dog shit executor of those policies. As a matter of fact, there's a quote from Bill Barr immediately after the January 6th insurrection where they ask Barr, they're like, hey, how do you feel about Trump? And he's like, I would say to any Trump supporter that if you wanted to continue to support Trump, he is the worst executor of his own agenda. I agree with that. Trump sucks ass.
Way worse shit, which is why we'll have like things like term limits and stuff now, right? There's been bad shit in the past. What I'm talking about is you're an originalist. My conclusion from that would be that you would value people who honor and respect the institution of the Constitution. Sorry, I'm word swapping there. Of people who honor and respect the Constitution. I'm moderate. The biggest criticism I get from all the liberals in my social space is that I am the moderate, that I am the biggest bullshit fence sitter, always tries to see the other side. I can't even begin to understand how, if you think the current administration is violating free speech, which I hope you would grant the FIRE, it seems like you like FIRE, at a massive rate compared to any presidency in the last 20 years combined. So 67 times, I can send you the data, 67 times more infringements in this year alone than in the past 24 years, right? So a pretty big escalation of free speech violation. I'm surprised that an originalist wouldn't want to vote in such a way to diminish the power of a president that obviously wants to overstep the Constitution and the American project. That's what I'm surprised by.
Well,
okay, but as an example, in the midterms, okay, let's say that there was a never Trump Republican who was running in a local election and the other option was Zohran Mamdani. Sorry, guys, I hate to say it, but I'm going to reserve the right to vote for a moderate Republican over a fucking socialist. You might not like that. You might hate me, be like, dang, Connor, I thought you were a base liberal. I thought you were a base Democrat. Nah, brah. If you run a communist, I'm going to vote for a moderate Republican. If you make me choose between a moderate a MAGA Trump sycophant and a communist, I'm going to kill myself at the airport. That's an internet meme. Don't self-harm. I will not be self-harming. I'm just saying. Don't make me choose between MAGA and a communist. Jesus Christ.
A few responses. One, it is, I think, totally rational to criticize Trump for his position on free speech. I haven't seen the data you're looking at. And by the way, and I do consistently and often, but I have not seen the data you're looking at. I'd be delighted to look at it. I can't really respond to it because I haven't seen it. I would suggest, I don't know this, but I would suggest that one of the problems with data collection like that is there's a statistical methodology problem. Like, for example, Biden, in the complaint that got struck down in the Supreme Court eventually, Biden v. Missouri, where the allegations of censorship in social media that came from his administration, the recitation of the...
Pause you. I'm so sorry. There's a noise, super chat. Okay, go ahead, sorry.
The recitation of the violations there was 77 pages long, right? Does that count as one? I don't know how the data was collected. So if we want to look at the data, we can. I can't really comment it until I know what that actually means. But let's say this.
I have not read Rin's World.
Let's say I grant you that Trump is very bad on free speech and worse than Biden on free speech, which is not hard for me to grant because I've said it before publicly. That was before the YouTube stuff came out, which has made it closer. But still, I would still grant that Trump's been awful on free speech. The single greatest threat to the integrity of the Constitution in my lifetime has been the appointment of living constitutionalists.
Cameron Mosley says, why do people hate elites? Because elites are smug douchebags, and I include myself in that.
Judges to the Supreme Court. And it's not close. Like, that was by far the thing that absolutely caused the most chaos in our Constitution. And oftentimes it's done, how did Obama put it? He said, I'm paraphrasing, I don't have the exact quote, but he said, I want to appoint judges who aren't just bound by history and tradition, but also rule by empathy. Something along those lines. And it sounded like beautiful and wonderful and great. But what he meant was, I would like judges who think that their empathetic sense of what's right or wrong is a good enough reason to amend the Constitution by fiat. Nothing Trump has done is even close to the damage that's done to our Constitution by having justices on the court who believe they have the right to unilaterally amend the Constitution. It's not even close. So, we're not even in the ballpark of me thinking that this is the right move because of that reason. Now, if your ask was different, and this is my problem with these struggle sessions, if the ask was, shouldn't reasonable conservatives criticize President Trump and call him out when he does these things, I would agree with you, and I do those things. But your ask is for me to join your political project, and for me to join your political project, I would need to trust your side again, and I have never been given a reason to do so.
Yeah. So I'm here, and this is a struggle, right? This is a struggle. I think Ryan and I are different in this regard. Pictures. Where's my beautiful drawing? Here's my beautiful drawing, okay? This is my political project, all right? It's the Coalition of Girl Hottists, COG, if you will. And what I would argue is that Hassan Piker and his ilk and the far lefties have seized internet discourse, even though they're not particularly politically relevant. And there are, of course, cringe progressives. The Soc Dems, the Social Democrats, they get upset that they're thrown up here. But even if they're not like culturally outside of the Overton window, I would say economically, we are nowhere near close to instantiating Scandinavian economic policy in the United States of America. So Soc Dems, I'm sorry that you're stuck up with the lunatics, but we're nowhere near to that close, right? So I think that there's some progressives who could be sane. I think there's plenty of sane liberals. I think there's plenty of sane never Trump Republicans and neocons. The contrarian right is made up of like Tim Pool dumbasses, but I think that they could probably be argued to and convinced away from Trump. And then I think MAGA, if we understand their descriptive grievances, we could make prescriptive political arguments that might be able to attract them away from MAGA and the dissident right, which is currently dominating internet discourse on Twitter, especially, but is in general quite like substantively larger on the internet than it should be. And what I would like to do is build a coalition of girl hottists where, yeah, sure, we don't have to vote the same on gun control. We don't have to vote the same on abortion rights. We don't have to vote the same on taxation policy. But what this coalition should agree on is that the Republic of the United States is good, that the Constitution that we are under is flawed, but good, and that we should save the Republic and perpetuate it for another generation. And so my argument there is that I will work with liberals and I will work with progressives in reference to aligned goals. And I would like if liberals and progressives weren't constantly trying to purity test the right wing into becoming liberals. Because I've had a similar struggle session with Pisco where he's like, bro, you're practically a Democrat, just be a Democrat. Listen, bro, I'm going to be a Democrat or a Republican, or I'm going to vote Democrat or Republican, depending on what I think is most politically efficacious. But I'm not going to sign off on all the lunatic moral like neutrality and moral relativism that's common within liberals. I'm not going to sign off on the anti-theism or anti-social behavior. I'm not going to sign on the anti-natalist behavior that's common in liberals. And I'm also not going to sign off on all the fucking crazy woke progressive bullshit. I know plenty of liberals won't sign off on plenty of woke lefty progressive bullshit. But then at the same time, because they're in a political coalition in order to defeat the right, they sometimes have to pander to dipshits in this category. I view the normalization of Hassan Piker, who I do consider far left, basically a Marxist-Leninist revolutionary propagandist who pretends to be a social democrat so he can be part of the Overton window. I view the normalization of Hassan Piker as you guys effectively drinking cancer in front of me. You're like, hey, Connor, watch this. And you like chug cyanide. So yeah, the same way that the right wing embracing Donald Trump and embracing Curtis Yarvin and J.D. Vance being seen as like a moderate, but he is a post-liberal right winger. The way that I think the right wing is chugging poison right now is the same way that I think the left wing chugs poison. So yeah, I'm interested in the bottom half of the horseshoe. These people can go fuck themselves. These people can go fuck themselves. All right. Same page. Let's do it.
It's not my ask.
Your ask was I should vote as a Democrat or not as a conservative in the midterms.
You could do that, or you could vote.
Or vote against MAGA, which I do not think is a crazy ask. All right, I got Nasser Games. I'm going to send him an invite. I'm going to go use the restroom. I'm going to let them entertain you for another minute. In summary, though, what I would say what I got out of this is Ryan might not be willing to bite bullets that I want to bite. And Erudite is, I think they could have had a different conversation that was more productive. I do understand that, especially with all the crazy shit that Trump is doing right now, it's probably befuddling and bewildering, to see people who didn't vote for Trump not committing to limit Trump's power in the midterms. I understand that that's probably befuddling and bewildering. I get that, but you attract more flies with honey. And I don't necessarily think this might be presented in a tone that's honey, but I don't think that the message is particularly sweet. But we'll talk about that when I get back. I sent Nasser Games an invite. I'll be back in 60 seconds after I use the restroom.
To weaken Trump's power
Yep.
in the
Oh, also, like the stream, share it with your friends, engage with chat, super chats if you got them, memberships if you got them. I parasocially love you. Thank you for being here.
midterms.
That is asking me to join your political project. That is your political
No, it's
project.
not. No,
Well,
it's
okay,
not.
what is your political project?
My political
It is
project
not
would be
that. What is it?
seeing Democrats elected broadly right now.
Okay. And if I did what you just suggested, would that assist your political project?
Sure, but you shouldn't.
Okay.
Wait, are you just going to ontologically reject something that would align with me, even if it would align with your own value system as well? Yes, diminishing Trump's power will also benefit my political project, but it doesn't mean it's actually the same
No,
thing.
because
right?
if your concern was purely about this, you could say we need to find reasonable conservatives. We need to find conservatives who will do what Ted Cruz did and criticize President Trump vocally when the FCC made those threats, right? We need conservatives who are going to stand up for natural law principles and stand up for the Constitution. That could be your ask. Like, let's find those people and let's support them on the right instead of supporting like a MAGA cultist. That could be your ask, but it isn't, right? Because what you're asking for is actually different than that. And it's a meaningful distinction. What the problem in these kind of like struggle session type conversations is that the ask is always the political project ultimately. It's never, how can we make the right more reasonable? How can we support the type of candidates on the right who might actually moderate the Republican Party? And I know that that's not the purpose of the project, because in the last midterm cycle, the DNC threw its weight behind Trumpy candidates on purpose, because they wanted to have them.
Wait, do you think that I support this? Wait, do you think that I support this?
I don't know what you support. We've just met. But I'm saying, you're asking me.
Wait, no, stop, because I will let you talk. Don't equate what my project or my vision is with just what broadly the DNC is, because all that would belie is that you have no idea what I ever talk about ever publicly, because you would know how openly critical I've been of the DNC. I don't support that idea. I say all the time to the left that for democracy to work, you need a strong left and a strong right. So, like, just don't put words in my mouth.
Well,
there's no point. If you want to talk to me, talk to me.
Okay. So then on that regard, your point has been that if I voted for any conservative, it would be inappropriate in these circumstances, which is...
It depends. Would you vote for a Republican that's anti-Trump? Because if you vote for an anti-Trump...
Yeah, why is Connor ranting? It's because I'm still alive, guys. I'm still alive. That's why I'm ranting.
Okay, but just said, if you vote for an anti-Trump Republican who just consistently votes
Love you too, Magnus. Bye, buddy.
against, was not for like the triple B and stuff like that, I have no problem with that, right? Growing the Republican Party to have a larger anti-Trump base would be fucking awesome. I'd be super down for that. I have no.
Tapingro says $5. My favorite part of you, Connor, is that you know enough to make arguments, but gritty enough to roll around in the disagreement. Kudos, my grill hottest. Thank you, Chapingro. Thank you for your memberships, and thank you for your support. Let me go ahead and shout out everybody who supported the stream today. Potter Tour also gave 10 Canadian. Incompetence Reward, I thought you were reading something off screen. Thanks, King. I appreciate you. I'm an idiot. So thank you. Sacred Snow renewed their membership. Thank you, King. L. Messer gave a super chat. Thank you, King. Patriarch gifted 10 memberships. Thank you, buddy. And also, that's very generous. Grassroots Hegemon with 20 memberships. Absolutely insane donation. Thank you, brother. Chapingro, 5 gifted memberships. Thank you for your support. This is probably one of the first times that I've seen you in chat, Chapingro. So thank you for chatting and thank you for supporting. Big Hoff 98, thank you for your super chat. Varun Baskar, thank you for your super chat. Chapingro became a member. AF Racing, Chapingro, and Potter Tour, thank you for your super chats. I parasocially love you, and thank you for the support. Yep. My streamer. Yep. All right. This is everybody saying I'm an idiot, and I'm too embarrassed to do it. I'm too embarrassed to read all of your super chats through me being a fucking moron.
Qualms with that.
Okay, now this is actually, I think, a more useful conversation because the thing.
General Ballsack says, ask Eddie Vet how government healthcare works. Listen, if you have something serious, this is kind of the way that I contextualize government healthcare because I am on the VA right now. If I have cancer, I'm fucked, right? If I have cancer, I'm fucked. I will die of cancer because they will take so long to approve my treatment that I will die of cancer if I get cancer. However, in reference to getting prescription medication, in reference to seeing my doctor once per year, in reference to, I don't know what else, but it basically, if you are healthy, government healthcare is great. If you are sick, you might as well be dead.
That happens, and I don't want to hold your feet to the fire, but that is a different ask than you had previously, which was to vote Democrat or not vote specifically. But this is, I think, a much better conversation to have because post-Trump, and now I'm talking 28, there's going to be a seismic shift. Everyone has a prediction. My prediction is the same thing will happen that happened in the midterms last time, which is that elements of the right don't vote when he's not on the ticket. And as a result, there'll be a rush to the center, because the center will actually matter more than it did in the last elections. I'm being optimistic.
Master Games, you got a mic?
I think there's a very useful conversation to be had among moderate Dems and moderate conservatives about what running candidates that will make the future better looks like. But that's very
cam
different
up and I'll add you.
The aspect previously.
Oh, there we go.
And I think that
Okay. So in summary, I think Ryan is maybe a little bit too intransigent about, I don't even know if I use the right word. That could be an incorrect word. But what I mean by that is I think he's too hostile to people who are probably both parallel support the Republic of the United States. I think that his reflexive disdain for the center left is probably too much. That being said, I understand that he was recently a Democrat. And so as a result, he might have some leftover feelings that makes him more hostile than I am. But I think that getting sane people to support the Republic of the United States is just a good coalition to build. Have a beautiful one. I'll catch you soon.